And good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to today's episode of Law News and Laughter, a very special episode in which we are looking at the upcoming Voice referendum. We are 4 days out from the vote that will potentially change Australia's constitution to institutionalise potential racism or recognition for Indigenous Australians, depending on your point of view. Given what's going on with everything else in the world, I very nearly didn't do a show today because the news is saturated with a very specific topic. However, this is important. And whilst we are going to be reviewing the debate that took place last night on Channel 7, I am going to be doing that over on Rumble for very specific reasons. What I'm going to do here, though, is I'm at least going to start the discussion. And we're going to talk about exactly what's going on, why it's important, and why, in my opinion, and my own personal opinion, I always say everybody should do their own research, but in my personal opinion, Australians should be voting no. So, let's get stuck into it, people. Welcome to today's episode of Law, News, and Laughter. A little light on the laughter today, not going to lie, but we'll see if we can spice it up. Don't mind me for just a second. I'm trying to find out exactly where this has gone because I had everything set up and I've got things on various screens, but for some reason StreamYard won't tell me where the exact tab is that I'm looking for. No, that's not it. That's not it. Mama Bear, no, that's completely irrelevant. There it is. Okay. So, it could be worse considering the world events. Yeah. I have to ask, don't Indigenous people already have a seat at the table in Australia? Jason, that is exactly what we're going to be talking about, and why, in my personal opinion, everybody already has a voice Indigenous in the Parliament of Australia. But I can understand why certain individuals would feel otherwise, and we're going to look at both sides of it. I'm not going to try and sway people one way or another. May have already said that I was going to. I may be a hypocrite today. Let's get stuck into it. For anyone that doesn't know, this Saturday on the 14th of October, Australians will be required to go to the poll for a double supermajority resolution to amend the Australian Constitution. The Constitution can only be amended if 50% of all people across Australia vote yes, and the majority of each state vote yes, hence the supermajority. On Saturday, those who have not already voted, because the voting has been open for the last, the 9th, so it's been open for about a week or so. Can't sway you, you've already voted? Fair enough. On the ballot paper is specifically the words, a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this alteration? Now, setting aside the fact that question itself to me is inherently disingenuous, as I've said on multiple occasions, because, automatically if you say no, people that give a shit will be calling you a racist. But the actual problem that I have is with the actual wording of that is supposed to be inserted into the Constitution, which is this bit here. Hang on, there we go. So this is the section that they're looking to insert into our Constitution. Section 129, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. In recognition of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the First Peoples of Australia, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. And the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to the Parliament and to the Executive Government of the Commonwealth of Australia on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. 3. Now this is the big one, because this is the one that causes the contention for me. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have the power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers, and procedures. Now, let's break this down as to why I have concerns, and then we can get stuck into the yes side of it. 1, as someone has rightly already pointed out, we'll call it a subsection of society because it is a certain percentage, but it is still a minority percentage, still have a voice within the Australian Parliament. Specifically, there are at least 2 Australian senators who are Indigenous. There are a number of media personalities who obviously make their voices heard, which we will be hearing from Ray Martin, for example, later on in the debate. But like everybody else, hang on, for me, there are too many Indigenous Australian people saying no, so why would I vote yes? It's a damn good point. Because here's the problem. From my view, there are a bunch of people that seek to gain potentially from this politically and financially. These individuals, who I understand are key proponents of the voice, have also decided to seek reparations down the track, to also push for a treaty, to do any number of other things that may or may not place a burden on everyday Australians as well. Now, as for the actual wording, there are two main issues that I have with this. One has been recently pointed out by a constitutional law professor, and the other is the one that I myself have got my hackles up about. Firstly, let's look at the wording of Section 3 here, which is the one that I personally have issues with. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have the power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers. Powers is what I have issues with. If this is supposed to be an advisory body, why does it require any powers at all? If this is supposed to be a body that is able to make representations to the Parliament and to the executive government, so for example, for those watching in the US, to put together papers and provide it directly to the President of the United States or to table it in Congress, why do they need any powers whatsoever? Why does that word need to be in there? Why does there even need to be an opening for Parliament to grant them powers? I personally don't feel like that needs to be in there at all. Without us, Hayden would have less news to cover. A little bit, yeah. It's like someone typing first in the chat and thinking it means something. Oh, by the way, first. Now, the second thing, and the far more dangerous thing from my perspective, is what was raised by a constitutional scholar, in that the federal government system is set up so that unless something is referred to in Section 51 of our Constitution, the federal government can't touch it. It's more or less the same sort of thing as the Americans have, wherein if there is nothing that is enumerated, it falls to the states. Same thing here. If it's not in Section 51, it falls to the states. This, however, could potentially open the floodgates for the federal government to rule over all sorts of things. Because, sorry to hear that, Mandy. Because all of a sudden you have a body that provides representations to the government. As a result of those representations, the Parliament shall be able to make laws respecting to matters relating to the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander voice. Now, theoretically, any representation based on that wording, any representation that the voice makes, would enable the federal government to then make a ruling. So, for example, if they provide a representation that they do not like people of a certain country, admittedly that's already a federal thing because it's international relations. That was a bad example, Hayden. Okay, let's say the voice makes a representation to federal parliament that they are being impacted by gold mining in the Victorian goldfields. Under this, theoretically, under the wording, now people can say that they don't, and I'm going to read a letter from 70 other law scholars that have said that this isn't an issue, but I call bullshit. But theoretically, based on that representation, the federal government could institute a Commonwealth law prohibiting or restricting the use of gold mining in that particular area on the basis of that representation. The wording for this is so open-ended that I personally have issues with this. I'm not actually against people having a voice and being represented in Parliament. I am against opening up to federal blank check powers where there's very little fettering of power or checks and balances in place or anything like that. So basically what it is it's, to me, this is an open-ended power that all of a sudden the government's going to have to make rules that would not ordinarily apply to anybody on the basis of trying to protect a certain segment of society. I don't like it. I very much don't like it. Now, aside from that, there is also, again, the argument that, well, everybody should be equally represented, and we already have the Parliament set up in a structure so that individual areas are represented in Parliament. At the federal level, there's 152 representatives in the House of Representatives. Each one of them represents roughly 110,000 people cut out in geographic areas around Australia. Now, admittedly, that means that where there's a dense population, where we're in large cities, for example, they're going to be represented by more members of parliament. That's just the long and the short of it. When you go into, say, rural Western Australia, where a whole bunch of native title land has been taken over for exclusive use, yes, if census data is not collected properly, if people do not register, if people do not make themselves heard, then obviously they're going to be less represented. Prefer the Australia's Got Talent bill. Use it to ban cattle ranching. Hope you like bug burgers. With regards, Klaus Schwab. Well, there is that too. But I mean, there was a story in the paper this morning that I didn't really think was worth covering. But native title is a big thing. It is a big problem. For example, there is a specific beach in Queensland, where the natives are chasing people off the land because they have native title rights to it. Native title is not supposed to exclude everyone from the land unless it is an exclusive native title claim. Now, as far as I'm aware, this particular claim near Hervey Bay up in Queensland is not exclusive use native title land. More to the point, I don't specifically believe that there should be any sort of exclusive use native title on a beach. I believe that the beaches, given that they're on the ocean, which is sort of the boundaries of where you wind up with international issues, I believe that beaches should be completely open to all Australians. I can understand specific plots of land. I can. But not the beach. I'm a Kiwi and I've been getting spammed on Twitter for people pushing the yes vote. Yeah. Oh, and let's talk about the AEC as well. Because the AEC, the Australian Electoral Commission, has really... How many minutes in are we? 12. Has really fucked me off about this. The Australian Electoral Commission specifically stated on Twitter that if people went and voted at multiple voting places, irrespective of whether or not they've had their name checked off, their votes would still count if they went and voted multiple times. Now, whether or not it is legitimate or not, there was one gentleman on Twitter that showed an image that he had voted at least 10 times at different voting poll places. And those votes cannot not be counted because the voting is random and there's no, it's just a poll. It's completely anonymous. Now, the AEC itself has said that there's nothing that they can do about it. They said that they contacted that particular gentleman on Twitter, but they didn't say whether or not there was going to be any sort of response to it. They just said, "Oh yes, we've messaged him." Well, good fucking on you. Time for a good road trip to the polling stations. Well, some of us have morals, unfortunately. So you can vote no multiple times. Yes, theoretically, it is against the law. It is a crime, but I would in no way promote it. But I also would not necessarily condemn it if individuals did, in order to, in order to balance the scales, shall we say? Because it's very clear that individuals have been. So yeah, there are multiple issues with how this is being handled. My main issue, as I said, maybe Australia is actually Georgia or Arizona instead of Ohio. Yeah, no. Things with this referendum seem far worse, I'm not going to lie. As I said, my main issue is with the wording with this. I don't have an issue with Indigenous people having representation, but I genuinely believe everybody should have equal representation. And at this point in time, I believe that they do receive equal representation. I purely think that... hold up, you're going to vote on a referendum on your freaking constitution and the voting does not involve ID. Are you insane? Brandon, it does involve ID. You do have to show your ID and you do have to get checked off on a list. But that list is paper. There is no cross-checking whatsoever until after the fact. And by then, they can't remove the votes. So, yeah, there is that. What was I going to say? Hang on, I should actually bring up... Hey, Neo Dark Matter, thank you to the 44 of you already watching over on Rumble. Once we get to the actual debate, I will be switching over to Rumble exclusively. So just so for anyone that is in the YouTube chat, actually, I should probably put the Rumble link into the chat so that I've got that there. The problem is May, yes. So, now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the letter that supposedly, according to 70 constitutional law professors, including the head of constitutional law at my alma mater, have signed off on. Some of which comes across as quite woke, and a good chunk of which I still disagree with, and I don't have any qualms about it. Because, well, let's read it, shall we? Australian public law teaches on what the Australian people need to know before they vote in the referendum. We are public and constitutional law teachers from universities all over Australia with experience teaching law students about the Constitution and referendums. Very often, students come into our classroom with little knowledge of the Constitution. Our job is to teach them about the history and operation of the Constitution and equip them with the skills to analyse legal arguments and assess proposals for constitutional reform. Yes, and thank you very much for that, by the way. That is why I have issues. We are in a unique position to help Australians understand the fundamentals of the Constitution. We write this letter in the spirit that we approach our teaching, not as advocacy for a particular position. We'll see. But to clarify some of the issues that are causing confusion about the proposed constitutional change, to help Australians sift through what they are reading and hearing, and to assist them make an informed choice at the upcoming referendum. There are many resources available for voters who want to understand the fundamentals of the referendum question, including my channel. If you don't want to watch this video, I did one over on Locals back in March, which is about a half hour shorter. More technical information, particularly those that are different legal views. In law school, we teach our students techniques to assess competing legal opinions, which include looking at the evidence the author is using to support their opinion and the author's experience working in the specified field. This skill is important. For instance, in assessing the stated concern of the no case that the proposed amendment is constitutionally risky, and in particular that it might lead to dysfunction and delays in the government. Okay, now explain to me how my personal opinion on this, with the fact that it seems to be opening up a new heads of power for the federal government, is not going to cause issues in the government. Oh, right, because if there's a conflict between federal and state laws, the Commonwealth laws overrule, and therefore there's no issue. We know the vast majority of legal expert opinion agrees that this amendment is not constitutionally risky. These views are supported by a careful argument drawing on precedent, that is previously decided cases, and a deep understanding of the court's approach to constitutional interpretation. These experts also agree that the proposed voice provision is consistent with the Australian constitutional system. The Solicitor General, the government's top lawyer and experienced constitutional barrister, has advised that the voice is likely to improve the operations of our constitutional system. As public law teachers, we also know that the importance and understanding of the history of the Australian Constitution when considering changes to the document. This history is important, for example, in responding to the erroneous claims that the voice will introduce race into the Constitution. Wait until you hear their argument for why the Indigenous voice being introduced into the Constitution is not introducing race. The Australian Constitution was drafted in the 1890s, and came into force in 1901. The original Constitution was approved through referendums in each colony, but many people, including women, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples, and people who did not own property, had limited or no voting rights. The framers, who were all white men, included the concept of race within the Constitution as they intended for the new Commonwealth Parliament to be able to pass laws that discriminated against the people on the basis of their race. In particular, they sought to pursue the White Australia policy, where the rights of white Australians were given preferential treatment in relation to immigration, employment, and movement. As such, whether or not we agree that the Constitution should continue to embed this concept, it is wrong to frame the voice as introducing a racial divide into the Constitution. The racial divide has always been there. In 1901, the federal power to make laws for the people of any race specifically excluded Aboriginal people on the racist assumption that it would likely die out under colonial policies that continued under the states. But in 1967, a constitutional referendum removed this exclusion and thus expanded the power to allow the federal government to make laws in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Since then, the only racial group for whom the federal government has passed special laws is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It is against this constitutional history that the voice provides a mechanism for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have input— you're not pushing anything here, are you? To have input into the laws and decisions that are made about them. Importantly, the proposed constitutional amendment is based not on the outdated concept of race, but through recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's place as Australia's first peoples. This is consistent with contemporary understandings of the rights of Indigenous peoples. The amendment was also requested by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Unlike the original draft of the Constitution, the amendment will be decided by a referendum of all eligible Australian voters, regardless of gender, race, or wealth, on October 14, 2023. That's disingenuous because it specifically says the amendment will be decided by all eligible Australian voters. Like 2 paragraphs earlier, you specifically said that the previous Constitution was voted on by all eligible voters. But anyway. In New Zealand, a local council just claimed ethnicity is self-perceived. I wonder how this would affect things. That's a damn good question. Wow, so now you can just identify as. And see, and this is one of the issues that I have, because one of the people that we're going to see tonight is Ray... Shit, I forgot. Ray Martin. His lineage, he claims that there is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lineage within him. And look, that may well be the case. But if it is so, it's like his great-great-great-great-grandmother. And everybody else since then, it's my understanding, has been white or white adjacent. So, I'm not so sure that I would agree with his assumption on things. But anyway. So then it goes through and it lists all the professors who supposedly think that they know better than the High Court as to how to interpret the Constitution and all kinds of crap. In 2018, a statue of a caged gorilla was removed because it was deemed racially insensitive. Oh, I'm not going to do it on this show, but someone please remind me about the monkey banana stand thing. Because I told my wife about it, and there was some very funny stories. Neo Dark Matter identifies as 10 different people, so there you go. Are we talking about Elizabeth Warren levels of native? Basically. So yeah, so there was that. So I've laid out why I have issues with it. Obviously, people are deciding that they want to have input in Australia's constitutional system in the federal parliament. I personally believe that they already received that through the same system that everybody else does. I mean, why are we not including everybody else in this then? So, but anyway, I want to get stuck into this debate because we're already almost half an hour in. And remember, Barry Sotorio taught constitutional law, enough said. I'm going to make the transition over to Rumble so we can start watching the debate. Guys, over on YouTube, thank you very much for tuning in. The link is in the chat. I will paste it one more time just to be safe. But yeah, I shall see you all over there. Cheers, guys.